Hold on. Get my other screen in. Hey, right, everyone, just bear with me a sec. Oh, let's mute that. Cool. Welcome everyone. So Will's not been able to do his live stream tonight, so I just seized the moment, very last minute, and just to see if yeah, just to sort of play around with a bit of a new format, to be honest, guys. So this is not a normal Q&A. So yeah, don't ask questions in the chat because we'll take it to the Thursday one. Oh, hold on. But what I did want to do is essentially have a bit of a space just to kind of just chat stuff through, really, just kind of talk about a few bits and pieces, get some feedback from the regulars if anyone's listening. There's a few things, but how you at, Shadownet? So just to say, if you've got a question, don't ask it tonight. There's a bit where basically over the last few months I've been like just kind of just sort of screen grabbing different bits and pieces that kind of gave me some ideas, and I just wanted to kind of play around with that this evening. You right, Lynn? So just because part of it's kind of around sort of planning a few things I'm thinking about, and just also just kind of giving opinions about different bits and pieces as well, because I guess that's kind of something we don't really focus on, although we've got plenty of opinions. So yeah, so the first thing I was going to say is that I went to Doughty Street's event on Thursday about like rogue landlords, or as they like to say, criminal landlords, because it is all criminal stuff rather than just sort of some roguish behavior. And it was really good. At some point, I'm sure they're going to put it up on their YouTube channel. So I would suggest you subscribe to Doughty Street Chambers. I'll put the spelling of that in the chat because it's a bit of an odd spelling. So there it is. So Doughty Street Chambers. There's loads of stuff already on there, but I think in the next couple of weeks they'll put up that event probably in its entirety. I don't know. How you, Anton? So yeah, and basically, yeah, loads of interesting stuff. Loads of it went over my head, but it does seem there's a particular thing which I'm interested in called an RRO, a rent recovery order. I don't know what it stands for, but basically, uh, it seems that a tenant can basically can use this thing to get money off their landlord if the landlord's terrible, basically. So I'm going to try. I haven't got more information than that at the moment because most of it went over my head. But I'm going to basically try and get the guy who gave the talk to maybe come on the channel if he's up for it or something. I don't know. But if not, it's the guy called Jamie. So if you watch it back, then there's going to be some stuff on there which I think might be interesting. But I just thought that was interesting. And also I spoke to Sarah Steinhardt, who's absolute quality. She was kind of hosting the event. She works at Doughty Street for many years, and she's been on a few events you might have seen on the channel before. And I just basically asked her, would she be up for an event, which I've been thinking about for a while, called the A to Z of. I want to call it the A to Z of council bullshit, but I don't think they're going to go with that. So, like an A to Z of council myths or council housing myths or council homelessness law myths. And so I went to our Facebook group a little while ago and just basically asked for suggestions. And I've been compiling a list, and I'm just interested to see if anyone, not just the regulars, but anyone at all, is kind of has any additional things to think about. So here's my current list in no particular order. So and my thinking is it's going to be like a, I don't know, hour and a half event, couple of barristers, whatever, or a barrister and Will, maybe, I don't know, haven't spoke to Will about it yet, but basically just run through as many of these things as possible, just not going into any depth on them, but just basically just giving like a knockout sort of thing. So for example, you can't be in priority need with just depression. You'd maybe just quote something like Lambeth, Thomas v. Lambeth, just because it's one example of many way it can be. He hasn't actually hit you though. Just kind of really quickly go for the definition of domestic abuse and show it's not just physical violence. So just kind of go through these things. So I mean, I'm not going to read them all out now, but if you can see them on a screen and you wanna, I'll just kind of scroll down sort of reasonably slowly. If you can see anything on this that yeah, it's just guidance. So I've heard that said before about the Homelessness Code of guidance. So yeah, anything on here that you just think you might be interested in adding to at all? Some of the stuff I've already covered, we cover quite regularly. So things like if you leave before the bailiff comes, then you'll be intentionally homeless, stuff like that. We talk about that quite a lot. So yeah, things like, officers saying, "Oh, we can't do that because we've got a housing crisis." So, but actually they've got a duty to do it. So yeah, these are the kind of things which I want to talk about. But I'm sure there's more. And I just want to have this kind of quick fire thing where we spend like 30 seconds, 60 seconds on each, and just basically, I know it's not going to go into kind of full full like level of detail and won't be enough. But I just think it's good for people to hear it, particularly from a someone like Sarah. It might not be Sarah. Basically said one of her colleagues might actually be better at it. I don't know, so I need to contact her and kind of confirm things. But I'm looking at maybe doing it in sort of 2 months ish. So yeah, that's kind of one of the things I've been thinking about. I'd be really interested to hear back any sort of additions you guys have got out there. Um, so yeah, that's the first thing I wanted to talk about. Um, Other bits and pieces that I'm planning another video about why the HRA hasn't actually worked, the Homelessness Reduction Act, why it hasn't actually reduced homelessness. So again, I've got 13 things which I've just been thinking about recently, which kind of think might be useful to put together. So the fact that the whole HRA was just centered on essentially saying, oh, it's the individual that needs support, it's their fault for being homeless, but actually that's completely the wrong end of the wrong end of the situation. So it's done nothing to increase housing supply or anything like that, which is their thing that actually reduces homelessness. So yeah, so there's again, I'm probably not going to read. Well, I'm not going to read all of them out, but you can see it on the screen just to sort of see what I'm thinking about there. But again, if you can think of things additional to that, um, yeah, that'd be cool. So
No one understands it on there.
yeah, yeah, hold on, that's a
I'm not
good
trying
one.
to be facetious, but
No,
I think
um,
it's probably the most quoted law from housing officers, but I don't know if they actually, and they don't understand it in relation to the Housing Act, right? Like,
yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, there's bits in it which don't actually make sense properly. Don't make sense. Some really weird bits in. So if you look in chapter 16, the code of guidance, there's bits which just don't, they can't make sense. But yeah, so yeah, so stuff like that. If anyone's got any things to add to that list, I just think it's interesting again just to kind of understand. It's not really kind of looking at specific issues that people have, but it hopefully might be useful for just kind of understanding where we're at with housing law, really. And just the fact that the government's stuck in this mindset where they see homeless people as being the issue, whereas that's not the way it works. It's not the people. Um, yeah, yeah. So the Lynn just putting in there, so the LHA is too low. Oh, hold on. So again, that would be something which which actually help if they did that. Um, so just I will answer questions as they come in that are just kind of nice and easy to answer. So some just answered there. Can case law help you with getting housed? Yeah. So basically, um, the way the law works is you've got the Housing Act 1996, which is the overarching legislation. Then you've got different acts which came along at different times in the last whatever it is 30 years nearly, which kind of amended bits. So there was the Homelessness Act in 2002, which was the only Labour edition. Everything else was Conservative or Conservative coalition, and that was actually the least significant. So that basically extended the idea of vulnerability to things like people leaving care and people being in prison and people leaving the forces. But it wasn't. I would argue it didn't really actually change the law at all because those things could always already count anyway. Then there's Localism Act 2011, which was probably the worst of the bunch because that was the thing which allowed councils to house people like hundreds of miles away. Um, there was a HRA in 2017, which we're obviously not fans of on the channel for various reasons. And then there's the Domestic Abuse Act, for example. There's other things as well. But so you've got this overarching legislation. You've then got the Homelessness Code of Guidance, which is helpful, but it's not actually. Hold on a sec. But it's not kind of. It's yeah. Yeah. It's kind of. Where was I going with this? Yeah, it's kind of helpful, but it doesn't always kind of go to the nub of things you need to know. Then you have case law, so you've got case law and things like vulnerability, which they're like really long documents, and that's when judges at various levels of court will basically say what the definition is. So the definition of vulnerability is never stated in the law. It's not really stated in the Code of Guidance, although it does talk a bit about it in the Code of Guidance. But then you've got cases like Hotak, um, Paniotu, Geest, all those kind of names. They're just the name of the person it's about. And in those, because it kind of builds up over time, you need to kind of understand all of the recent ones all together to understand what the definition is. There's a bit of reset in 2015. So Hotak was the Supreme Court case which reset everything. Sorry, Shannon.
no, I was just going to say, like, but what's interesting about case law, I think, is often on, say, like template letters that you might get from housing officers, they'll quote case law, but they're interpreting, it very, very different. I've said that wrong. Well,
Interpret, yes, we're right, we're good.
um, but very, very differently. So their perspective on it is different to sort of the reality of that case law. So whilst it can be like it can help you with getting housed, it wouldn't be uncommon for you to say use some case law, and the housing officer to go, that's not what that actually means. It means X, Y, and Z. When you're using case law, like it's places like Nearly Legal, they do a really good summary of it. And so
Yeah.
like because the actual case law sort of like judgments and stuff are often quite long. So yeah, that was the only thing I wanted to add. Sorry, Mike.
Nice, cool. Yeah, yeah. So yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. So I can guarantee, like 99% of housing officers haven't actually read the cases they're quoting. In fact, something Sarah said to me on Thursday, which they were seeing Chat GPT generated letters which made cases up. They didn't exist. So that's something to keep an eye out for as well, where you're kind of getting case law that's not actually real at all. They're just kind of Chat GPT just is making up as it goes. Um, so sorry, just kind of keeping track of this. So yeah, um, yeah. So there's just yes, Lynn's put some stuff forward here. Um, so yeah, so case law, yeah, case law can it get help you get housed? Yeah, you can quote it. So certainly when I started doing this sort of stuff, I'd quote case law at length. I don't bother these days because it's just not, you don't actually need to, but yeah, it helps sometimes. So you can kind of just, where you've got someone, let's say, who's got some current drug and alcohol problems, or kind of risk of relapse, and you might quote a case called Crossley v Westminster because that's what it's talking about. So but just because one case says a particular thing, it doesn't kind of, it's not universal. So you still have to make kind of, it gets a bit interesting, but you still have to kind of make the argument. So the fact that someone else with with the same diagnoses as you was found to be in priority need doesn't guarantee that you will be. You probably are, but it's not, it doesn't kind of work like that. So yeah, but yeah, as I say, thanks, Lynn. So yeah, that's the kind of, just want to flesh that sort of stuff out there around the HRA. Um, and then I've just kind of got some screen grabs from like various bits. I'll kind of go through these in order actually. So these are ones which have primarily come through on the YouTube channel, and so genuinely this is a real comment. The reason I say that is because I'm pretty sure that it was ChatGPT that wrote the comment, and I think it was like in response to a video I did, which was like, why do housing officers break the law so much, or something like that. So, and I checked out this person. It was a real person. It wasn't a bot. But basically, and I couldn't work out if they worked as a housing officer. Maybe they did. But it was interesting. I just thought because it kind of captured certainly what some people think. So it says, statutorily, which is why I think it's ChatGPT generated, because no one actually says it like that. Since Housing Reduction Act 2017 has been implemented, it's placed duties on local authorities and other organisations of early intervention for the homeless and those who are threatened with homelessness to focus on prevention and relief homelessness if truly the applicant is homeless and eligible. Even if it is intentional, none of the officers can gatekeep. They work according to the legislation. Homeless prevention officer must provide right advice that at least will signpost to where they can get help, like charity organisation for shelter. So as I say, this is like, it's nonsense, but I'm assuming quite a few people actually think this. And as I say, I would guess maybe this is someone who has like a housing officer as a loved one or something. I don't know. I don't think they're actually housing officers written it, but this is just, it kind of just, it made me think of the Brentwood LGSO report, which is what we'll come to next. If I go back to that actually, um, because we've talked about it, but I've not gone through it in depth yet. So um, it was published in January. It was completely. Can you see that, Shannon? Yeah, because I can't see it now. So yeah, so it was published in January, but it was actually authored on the 1st of November. Brentwood Council, which is just north of the M25, I think, just north of London. And effectively, I think what happened was they investigated an individual case, and then they kind of were like, "What the hell?" I guess the housing officer was literally saying, "Yeah, that's what we always do." So then the LGO were like, "Well, hang on a minute, let's actually look at some, 6 months worth of casework." And effectively, they found that the council only followed the law in 10% of the cases. So going back to the kind of that comment I just put on the screen, the HRA does not stop councils breaking the law at all. It just kind of almost like magnifies the amount that they're actually breaking the law. But this is so this is on the LGSCO website, LGO website, lgo.org.uk, where it kind of gives the outline, but it doesn't go into any detail. But then further down, you've actually got the investigation. And again, it's quite difficult, I think, to kind of do this live on YouTube, but I'm going to maybe pick out a couple of bits that stand out. So, and I'll kind of go through. So this is the complaint. Using our powers to investigate matters coming to our attention during the investigation, we open this investigation to consider whether the fault by the council in its handling of homelessness has caused injustice to others who have not complained. Specifically, The council's practice of closing cases where the applicant does not provide all required information within 14 days, and the advice and support provided to applicants served a notice to leave their private tenancies. So, I mean, this kind of maybe just touches on that idea that you've got to provide ID to make an application, but effectively, they had this imaginary policy, which clearly was unlawful, that if someone hadn't responded, then they just kind of close it down altogether. That's, I mean, I'm just thinking I might have the Homelessness Code of Guidance open as well, just to labour the point as well. So bear with me a sec. Let me just open it up because there's a few bit. I mean, there's loads that will kind of be contradicted by this. What the hell's going on now? What? My computer's just doing all sorts right now. Hold on. My screen has just gone weird. Hold on. Right. Let's just stop sharing that. Right. I can no longer see my. Sorry about this, guys. I can't even see my Zoom window now. Is that shared right now, Shannon?
Yeah, so you're still sharing the LGO.
It's so literally like. Oh, let me just turn my monitor off. Oh, hold on a sec. If I do it up there, there we go. Right, cool. So forget all that. Hold on. Let's get back to it. I've now opened up loads of stuff I did not intend to open. Don't save. Don't save. Cool, we're getting there. So yeah, so was it 18 point something? 18.11. Let's have a look. No, not that one. Somewhere around here. Something about closed. Let's just search for the term closed. That should get me there. Okay. Yeah, here we go. So 18.14, it is recommended that housing authorities have procedures in place for dealing with applications that are withdrawn or where someone fails to maintain contact with the housing authority after making an application. The Secretary of State considers it to be reasonable to consider an application closed where an applicant has not responded to any form of contact for 56 days or longer. So that's kind of, if that kind of, I mean, there's, as I say, there's more kind of to the, more in the guidance to draw from this. But this basically makes the point that, just because you haven't kind of given all of your ID within 14 days, that's just simply not lawful to close an application down. But that's what they were doing. Let me see if I can now find my screen that I've now lost. Hold on, here we are. So yeah, gosh, this is not straightforward when you're sharing from two things at once. So yeah, that's kind of part of it. So let's have a little look through. Again, Shannon, if you see something you want to just point out, just shout out, whatever. And again, this is just I just pick out some bits. So this just this kind of general threshold that the LGSEO uses. So that means we look at the available relevant evidence and decide what is more likely to have happened. So it's kind of balance of probability that they don't have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the council failed. They just need to look at it and kind of say, okay, well, it's more likely than not that the council broke the law. So this kind of gives it. Let me see what else they're kind of saying here. So again, we've got this idea of triage, which again is just dodgy. So, go on, Shannon.
Yeah, so sorry, it was just a bit above there where it said they gave Brentwood number 7. We gave the council a confidential draft and invited comments. The comments received were taken into account before the report was finalised. That wouldn't be FOIable, would it?
No, I don't know that the um. So you could FOI Brentwood? Maybe. I don't know. I don't see why it wouldn't be because it's like I don't see why there'd be any sort of like sensitive information in that, as in like the personal data or
Because
confidential
I
kind of
just
business
think it'd
stuff.
be really interesting to see what the council had issues with being sort of put out there or what their comments were.
Feels like you've volunteered for a task there, Shannon.
Yeah, sounds good.
um. So yeah. No, I mean it's nothing to lose by trying. So just FOI and see what they come back with. The code is this one here if you want to just
Yeah.
put it in your FOI. So yeah, let me just see if I can find a bit. So I probably should turn this into a Word document so I can search for terms. So yeah, in response to our inquiries, the council provided details of all the homeless cases it closed at triage in the 6 months up to May 2024. This is 424 applications. Of these, council provided copies of 326 housing advice request forms. So, I don't know how much good detail to go into this. Let me just see them go back to talk about this in a bit more detail because I think this then goes to the whole thing about being required to stay until the until the bailiff comes, whatever. Let me just go to this and see what comes back. So, private tenants, the code of guidance says that it's unlikely to be reasonable to continue to occupy a private rented tenancy before beyond the expiry of the notice to quit. Code of guidance 6.35. It's highly unlikely to be reasonable to continue to occupy past the court order granting possession. So yeah, this is kind of just for those who are kind of like having this with the council, and this is such widespread practice. I think a lot of people are seeing this. In fact, that's the most viewed video on this channel at the moment, is the one about bailiffs by some way, actually. So yeah, so there's just kind of an exploration of it. I'm not going to read it verbatim, but you guys can kind of go back and read it in a bit more detail. And again, I might go into this in a bit of detail, because this whole triage process is kind of it's undermining the point of the low threshold of making an application. Because I'm guessing what's happening is they've kind of got this imaginary triage stage, and if someone doesn't satisfy that, then they'll just not take the application. But that's not how it works. You have to take it once you start making inquiries, you've taken the application. So the council, 23, the council has a duty to make inquiries and decide what, if any, further duties owed to it. Has reason to believe someone might be homeless or threatened with homelessness within 56 days. An applicant does not have to fill in a specific form or provide specific information for this duty to arise. Reason to believe it might be a low thresholds. Really important stuff there. I know I'm reading it really quickly, but this is like really fundamental stuff. This will define lots of people's experience of the homeless application process. So some of the information the council requires from the steps in its triage letter, such as copies of notices, is relevant to initial decision about whether and what duty the council owes. Some identification documents are necessary for the council to satisfy itself with the applicant's eligibility. So just to make the point that you can make a homeless application if there's reason to believe that you might be homeless, and then interim accommodation is offered or is owed if there is reason to believe that you might be homeless and might be eligible, might have a priority need. But the point here is that saying that the whole kind of point of satisfying itself, that comes later. The initial duty is low, so you don't need ID to trigger the reasons to believe that you might be eligible, you might be in priority need, and so on. So the council have to get those documents through the homeless application process and then make a decision based on it, but it's not at that initial stage. But much of the information required, which includes bank statements, 5-year address history, and other documentation, is not necessary for the council to decide if it owes a duty, which is interesting. And again, that's not talking about the initial duty, the initial low threshold. That's talking about the final decision at the end of the relief period. While it is appropriate for council to expect applicants to provide information as part of its inquiries, the duty to make those inquiries is on the council. The duty arises when it has reason to believe the applicant might be homeless or threatened with homelessness, not when it decides an applicant has jumped through all the right hoops. Again, this is like really common. Gosh, Shannon.
No, I think that number 25, the language there of like not when it decides the applicant has jumped through all the right hoops, I think is unusual for LGO cases, like to use sort of colloquial terms like that. And I think to me that speaks to the culture of Brentwood. Like if they're noticing that, that to me is quite like a cultural term, and maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I think that's a comment on like how they're treating people, as numbers, jumping through the hoops, and not as they should be. Not just obviously like the legal stuff that we're also talking about that's important.
Yeah, yeah. No, I heard it at the conference on Thursday as well. Actually, there was kind of this sense that the LGSCO is kind of getting more. First of all, they're kind of increasing recommended compensation in some types of cases, and also just seem to be a little bit more sort of assertive, which I think are good things. I obviously think they could probably go further, but anyway. So I'm not going to read every paragraph, but let's go back to this one, 28. So of the 326 housing advice request forms we reviewed, we found that the information in the form alone on balance met the low reasonably threshold in 216 cases. So there should have been 216 homes applications accepted. This is more than 2/3 of the applications we reviewed. This means there were 216 people to whom the council had a duty to make a decision and could not just close their case. Such decisions must be in writing and carry statutory review rights. Despite this, the evidence shows the council only made a proper decision in only 22 cases. So quick maths, that's just over 10%. That's nuts. I think even Bedford at its worst was about 50%.
How's someone not going to like jail for this? Like, and I'm,
Because
I'm not even trying to. It's not even like I don't want people to go to prison. I don't want like, do you know what I mean? But like when you read these statistics, how is no one at least losing their job for this? Like so many people there, and let's have it right as well. Like, and I don't know if the report touches on it because again, I've not read it all in detail. But it's got to be the most vulnerable. Like, you know that because only 22 cases went through. And I can
yeah,
guarantee 22 cases aren't the most vulnerable cases out of the 216. Like, how is someone not less lost their job over this? And again, I'd want to FOI that. I'd be like, right, any like change in staff since this report's come out? Like, what's your? But
Yeah,
it's me. This is such a massive effect on people to
I
have
mean,
no sort of like accountability or.
I'm going to throw Homeless Link under the bus a little bit for this. So just to say, this is my opinion and my opinion only. I'm trying to find a bit actually. Hold on, because again, like so, because there was this kind of like, I saw the CEO of Homeless Link post about this, but then I can't find the thing now. I'm not going to be able to find it. But basically, yeah. So essentially, kind of saying, yeah, this is, yeah, they're kind of effectively trying to justify it, in my opinion. Just kind of say, yeah, it's kind of, here it is. I've got it here. Hold on. So this is, just get make sure. Yeah. So, oh, gosh, I should get a slicker at this at some point. So yeah. Here. So this is Rick Henderson, who's Chief Executive of Homeless Link. Homelessness Reduction Act was designed to be a gateway to ensure people facing homelessness didn't end up in the streets. The Brentwood judgment shows what happens when this premise is corrupted, when gateway becomes gatekeeping. It almost certain a desperate attempt by councils to manage increased demand with diminishing resources, but it's just not good enough. Now, I just don't think, I don't like it even just being attempted to justify it because the law is so clear in this stuff. And again, yeah, this kind of it turns it into this kind of mention of funding, and I'm like, it's not about doesn't it's kind of the funding system is not they need to build houses. It's not about funding charities more. And I put a pithy comment in response, but didn't get very far with that. So yeah, so I just yeah, the number of people kind of who are sort of trying to excuse the council, and it's just it should not be excused. They shouldn't even attempt to excuse it, in my opinion. It's just sorry, I've not been looking at the chat here for a
The
second to see if I've
LGO
not missed anything.
doesn't. The LGO doesn't excuse it. Like in
Yeah,
their reports, the literal body to hold local authorities to account on this doesn't make excuses. They recognise it's tough. They recognise it's difficult. But when it comes to legal duties, they're black and white about it. And yeah, I think it's odd to focus on the funding from that report. Like, of all the things to focus on, it's not, it wouldn't have been my takeaway.
yeah,
Like, my takeaway is very much the individuals, but the systemic impact that's having. And actually sort of housing officers a bit further down the line, to be honest. But
yeah.
yeah.
I'm going to just, there's a few more bits I just want to bring out of this. So, paragraph 32, where it has reasonably someone might be eligible, might be homeless, and might be in priority need, the council has a duty to provide interim accommodation whilst it makes inquiries. Section 108. The council's gatekeeping means it is likely it is failing to meet this duty. This is fault. More than 30 of the applications mention domestic abuse or other serious risks, for example. The code of guidance is clear that in cases of domestic abuse, the council should provide interim accommodation immediately and accommodation first, ask questions later approach, which prioritises victim safety. And again, what you're saying before, Shannon, about kind of using kind of more colloquial language to explain the law, which I think is a great thing actually, because that's not the wording of the code of guidance as far as I can remember. I mean, I very quickly double check, but I'm pretty sure it's not. Hold on, I've got like a ton of invoices here I need to close down. Maybe that's why I'm getting confused. Or I'm just rubbish at this stuff. Was it 21.25? Let's have a quick look. Um, yeah, it doesn't use that language. But anyway, it's good. I mean, I would say like literally, so I think this is quotable. So I've quoted the LGO guidance before on domestic abuse in general. So again, but this is just really kind of it just makes it very kind of plain and useful to see. So the council's approach means it's missing out on opportunity to prevent homelessness. Applicants told the council about this. So paragraph 34. Applicants told the council about disabilities and mental health conditions. Many of the housing advice request forms indicate the applicant is currently rough sleeping. Others contain details of circumstances such as hospitalization or incarceration. People in such situations can find it difficult or impossible to provide documents, access online forms, or read and respond to emails. The evidence shows no consideration by the council of such difficulties. It nonetheless close such cases if they fail to complete all the required steps. So just stinks, doesn't it? Um, so, so
One, sorry, go on.
no, I was just going to read out 35. Go for it.
I was, I'm sorry, because we're not at the recommendations now, so I'm jumping about. But when I was skim reading the sort of blurb to this, one of the recommendations was sort of like they basically said that the council had to reopen all of those cases and invite people to continue their application. And I just, with point 35 there about like the significant injustice, I'm a bit, and maybe I'm being too harsh now on the LGO, but I'm a little disappointed they weren't like, and also encouraged each and every single one of these people to complain,
Yeah,
to complain and seek compensation because
yeah,
they'd have been owed it because they've
yeah,
been
yeah. I
gay.
mean,
Like they've literally proved this, and I know that's like potentially a lot more work for the LGO. But if I think that would have been quite a good two-pronged approach to be like, right, you now need to encourage everyone to complain, and actively encourage, and
yeah,
then
yeah.
sort of, but yeah,
Because I mean, all in all of those cases, at the very least, you could look at a few hundred quid. Some of them would be like, four figures quite easily. So it kind of felt like on that previous one it was talking about. So here, that felt like it was kind of like going towards the idea that there might be reasonably their own priority need in those situations, but it doesn't say that, which is a bit of a shame. But anyway, so recommendations. The council should consider the report at its full council, cabinet, or other appropriately delegated committee of elected members, and will require evidence of this. Again, this is where like the members of the public come into action because the council, if no one cares about it in Brentwood, if like none of the population of Brentwood care about this, like none of the charities do anything, nothing happens, then they'll just have a quiet meeting. They'll say, "Oh yeah, we shouldn't have done this," and then nothing really changed. They need, if there was some sort of public outcry about it, then it's probably going to be more useful. Interesting. It might be on the same line of thinking you're saying before, Shannon. It might be interesting to look at because the minutes of those meetings will be publicly available anyway. So it'd be interesting to kind of go on the Brentwood website just to see what discussion was, and like again whether they downplayed it, whether they tried to minimize it, or whether they were like, yeah, heads are going to roll sort of thing. Um, yeah. So yeah, just as Shannon kind of said, kind of that was kind of part of the action was to go back and get them to open all these cases. And then, so to prevent further future injustice and improve its services, within 3 months of the date of this report, the council will review and amend its triage process to ensure it is no longer gatekeeping by demanding applicants meet excessive, unnecessary, or overly rigid requirements before it will consider their cases. So again, that go back to that kind of that A to Z of council BS. Um, you need ID to make a homes application. This would probably be my go-to document to say no, you don't, because it's like this is what it's talking about. Um, does not take a blanket approach to closing cases after a set period. Consider the information it is. So yeah, again, I'm not going to read it all out, but yeah, yeah. This just to make the point, this Brentwood's like not like probably that much worse than most councils. Um, I just don't know in terms of like how it relates to other councils, and obviously there are councils that do their best to actually meet these stuff, although they're definitely in the minority. But yeah, it's an interesting case in general. You learn this is a good example where you kind of learn things from these decisions to kind of help you understand the law better because it's written, yeah, in kind of colloquial layman terms. So yeah, uh, sorry, Lynn, I missed your question there. So the case was Crossley v Westminster, 2006. So it's CROSSLEY v Westminster. If you got, in fact, Will Flack on his blog on his website, that's the only place I can actually find the transcript of that case. But it was a really interesting case for a number of reasons, actually. So, just to say, guys, sorry, I've not been watching the chat. Just to say, um, we're not taking questions in the usual way. If you've got kind of specific questions, we'll take it to the one on Thursday. So we're just doing this like last minute tonight because Will wasn't able to do it on his channel. So yeah, just so someone is making a point, can and will it be difficult for someone to challenge non-priority decisions due to vulnerability, depression, anxiety, potential autism, and other possible neurodevelopmental issues if the individual starts to work either part-time or work time? So yeah, I mean, I think a lot of councillors will see that you're in work and say, oh, you must be fine, and that's not the test. The test is what's going to happen to you if you become homeless, and I would argue that actually potentially losing your employment, would be part of the harm you'd come to. But yeah, it's I think it's difficult for any layperson to successfully argue vulnerability because it's quite a complicated test, and council officers have templates which basically just ignore everything anyway. But it's not that difficult for someone like Will or Karis to kind of basically take it down the court route and get it challenged. And yeah, me and Shannon, even as kind of lay people doing this sort of work, we were able to kind of actually kind of get a long way without needing a solicitor basically. So, but we did know the law pretty well to do that. Um, So again, I'm just kind of skipping over questions which are like specific ones. And some of them I can't, so I'm just trying to follow some of them. Okay, there's questions around there. Yeah. Again, I'd just say roll these questions on until Thursday. So in fact, probably what I'd say is stick these questions as a comment on any video on the channel, then I'll pick it up as a notification. I'll take it to Thursday anyway. Um, so yeah, just there's a few, as I say, a few other bits that I kind of picked up on, if I can find them. Where's it gone? Yeah, just kind of that's come, yeah, over the sort of thing. So that's, yeah, so that was kind of the comment that made me think of Brentwood. And actually, my response to them basically said, go read the Brentwood report if you think that the HRA has stopped councils breaking the law. It's just made, yeah, as I say, that they kind of break the law even more sometimes. I just thought this was an useful comment. Indeed, of all the authorities I had pleasure of dealing with, housing officers seem to be the most comfortable abusing their positions. I assume it's because so much I assume it's because so much training is on the job, so new staff are mentored and protected by their jaded seniors. Spot on. Yeah, I think that's exactly kind of what's happening that we're seeing, where officers just aren't even told what the law is, and they just and the thing I think they're culpable for is obviously not the ignorance, but it's the fact they're not curious when someone challenges them. So someone says, like actually that's not what the law is. They don't stop and think, okay, let's go and check out what the law says. In my experience, almost all the time they'll basically just double down and just kind of repeat the kind of the council's interpretation of the law or the misinterpretation of the law. And then this one here. So this is from the We Are Bedford group. I just thought I'd put this in here. It was by the time I saw this, the comment had been turning off. But I think they're chatting rubbish, basically. I don't think, but even Bedford Borough Council would say this. So it says, hi, I'm currently homeless, living in my car, but I work full time and earn decent money. I can afford the running costs of a property, but my issue is getting a deposit fees together. Um, is there any help I could get with this? I've tried with the council before, but basically told because I'm English, I won't get help for housing. Yes, I was told this by the council. Any help would be great. Thank you. So just to say, like, if a housing officer said that it was not serious, it's probably because this person said, "Oh, it's because because I'm English or whatever," and they probably just sarcastically said, "Oh, yeah, that's what it is." But it's not. There just to make the point, there is nowhere within the law which prioritizes non-English people over English people or British people on its own. So yes, you can have people who are not in priority need who are British, and they may well be essentially, they may not be a duty to them where there would be a duty to a family or whatever of kind of people who come from Ukraine or something or whatever. But yeah, I just thought, I mean, the 337 comments that followed was very fun, if nothing else. But I'd say by this point I couldn't actually put my two pennies in. But yeah, I think it just made me think about all the stuff that kind of goes with this. Obviously, on the channel, I get a lot of stuff like this that's kind of very much, I don't know, just yeah, not based on the facts and kind of mentioning whatever, kind of race and yeah, I can't remember also the word I heard the other day. I can't remember what it was now. But yeah, this is the kind of stuff which I think is out there a lot. But that's not to say that there isn't some truth or there's something that needs to be done about this. I probably won't say my thoughts about this publicly yet because I think I could get myself into trouble because I haven't quite. Well, it's going to be clumsy, but I do think I noticed that a lot of British people, white or otherwise, don't see homelessness as a legal issue. So they don't, they don't kind of think of it. They don't kind of, if I ask a lot of people, have you been to see your councillor or your MP or something? They're like, what? What's that got to do with me? But actually, that's something which I think we, as a country, we seem to have like not really kind of make the most of our democracy in that way.
I think to add on that without adding too much, because
Yeah,
we've had
yeah,
conversations privately about this, and yeah, it gets clumsy and messy. Um, but I think British culture, we're not good at complaining. Like that's in sketch shows, it's in comedy shows, like no one likes complaining. It's awkward and rude and we don't like being competitive or standing up for things, and like I think that feeds into this a lot. Like the cultural sort of differences of like if the council tells us we're not eligible, we go, all right then. Like, sorry to bother you, and sort of then bitch and moan on Facebook rather than going, oh, well maybe I am, let's research and fight. And I'm gonna stop there.
yeah. No, as I say, I think I'd like at some point just to kind of maybe speak more on the topic because I think it's important. As I say, like I've certainly been guilty of like just dismissing it all as just kind of being racism, but no, there's definitely truth within it. Not in this comment here. I think that's just someone just being kind of provoking a bit of a controversy or whatever. But I think there is something about just whether it's that kind of like that reluctance to complain or whatever that just basically means it's more difficult for people to access the assistance. And I think I did that video recently about this is meant to be a combative system. It's an adversarial legal system that we've got, and it's taken centuries to develop. There has to be that pushback. So yeah, so probably yeah, I'd say pretty sensible if we're just going to stay off the topic too much detail. And then I think this is the last one I've got. Yeah, done that. So this is just this is if you watched us before, you probably know that me and Shannon are not fans of supported accommodation. I saw this from a charity not too long ago. I've just anonymized it because I don't kind of I'm not really attacking them specifically. But this is a post. This was a good news post from them. This was seen as their kind of something to boast about. So that after 5 years living on supported accommodation, William, not his real name, has moved into his own independent accommodation. Now this is a low support needs accommodation. This is where people go if they've got any kind of like complex support issues. They're not allowed in anyway. So William has been living in accommodation since 2019. So this was written in 2024, I think, or 2025 potentially even. And during this time, he's benefited from tailored support from his tenancy support officer, had access to his activities and courses through our kind of this specialist, it's not specialist service, kind of this activity service, and a safe, suitable place to call home. And that's a hostel's not a safe, suitable place to call home anyway. Our support accommodation team work with people to see them move into their own independent accommodation when the time is right for them. When the time's right for them really bothers me because I'm like, who the hell are you to kind of decide that? Given this person was, low support needs to start off with, this is someone who almost certainly would have been able to maintain their own accommodation from day one. Gain employment and to find solutions for their specific needs. Now they can't gain employment whilst working in a hostel because it's like £300 or £400 a week rent if you're working. So I don't know. This sort of thing just irritates me, but it's very, very common in the sector, unfortunately. Again, I guess I'm just kind of picked up on it and screenshot it.
It's just as well like find solutions for their specific needs, which will bring them to a hope-filled future. Like, did you find solutions for their specific needs, or do they already exist? Like, we have so much research into various needs, whether they're physical, mental, whatever. I'm not. I just think it's a bit much for a charity to take credit for them finding solutions for needs. Like nine times out of ten, an individual will tell you what the solution is. Like, I have anxiety. The solution is don't ring me, but text me. Like, my future is no more hope filled because of that than it was beforehand. Um, and I know, so one of the places, and actually it's not this place, but another local place, when you just talked about the cost there, is charging £458 a week in housing benefits, plus a top up from the individual. And so like, all right, if they gained employment before moving on, great, but you've then charged extra as well because if you do start working, that person has to pay for that high rate housing benefit. So again, it sort of, I just feel like it's false advertising. Like, and I'd be a bit more, um, I'd respect these places a bit more if they were just honest about their position in the sector and their relationship with their clients. And I think one of the most damaging things about these sorts of things is William, not his real name because, we're hot on data protection in Bedford apparently, but William has probably been made to feel extremely like he has to be extremely grateful for all of this support, extremely grateful, and like he couldn't have done it without their support. When the reality is, he probably could have done it without their support, and they've just made money off of him. Like, and yeah, they probably
What did you say that weekly rate was? 400. So
£458 a
sorry,
week.
I need to interrupt you to do some math. So 458 times 52 times 5 equals £119,000. That support, that tailored support has cost. Now, that will pay for a psychiatrist for a year.
You
Um,
also then have to, so it's not a self-contained room either, by the way. You'd like have to share facilities. And then you have to pay like £20 a week top up on top of that. So like it's an extra £80 a month from the person. And it's just when you think how many beds that place has as well, and how much their income is, you think, well,
Millions,
it's
million.
cheap. Like that's higher than the LHA rate in Bedford. Like because I looked it up and I was like, what?
Yeah.
It's mad to me.
Yeah, just someone saying like just yeah, just to justify their own existence. What a joke. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
imagine what 120 grand could pay in terms of like I mean I just think this kind of mentality is partly at fault anyway. Just kind of oh you can get a psychologist for that whatever because it's not I haven't got it with me actually. I read a really good book recently called Friends and Purpose by Math Potts. Now Math Potts I probably would do a video about it because he's just really cool and he's like a disillusioned homeless sector worker and his things about like just people don't need like people just need each other. People just need like community. People just need find ways of um just being themselves, other people, enjoying each other's company and stuff. The title comes from the thing he did. Like he was speaking at a conference and he basically said, "Right, guys, close your eyes and think of like your best ever memory." And then he says, "I guarantee all of you that would have included memories with friends or something about your purpose. Most people, it's friends." And so, but the supported accommodation model does not create communities like that. I've never, I mean, I've got a soft spot for Emmaus. I think Emmaus do some valuable stuff, but everything else I've seen, like it's just not an environment which fosters genuine community at all. It's just like everyone's just like really depressed and like angry at the state of the place and all the rest of it. It doesn't really kind of generate that sort of like yeah setting really. I I've got a bit of a tangent to go on, Shannon, so I don't know if you want to just say anything else on this one.
I mean, I just imagine that money going on like a lawyer in the local day centre. Like the council could pay for that. Or yeah, and I think on the community side, you're right. Like I've been in various support accommodations, and Emmaus was the only one that had genuine community. But even that comes with its issues. But I found quite good friends out of there and what have you. But the the supported housing system's broken, and hopefully the act with the standards and stuff helps that. But I think we're very good at a sector thinking we have the solution and then trying something and not seeing the consequences or the knock-on effects. But hopefully there'll be some big changes, slow changes, but big changes coming up with that.
I'm just trying to work out how much it costs to build a house. I know, like, I'm not saying what the developers charge because it's ridiculous, but so I mean, it's probably gone up since COVID. But so the builders I used to work with, like they charge 12.50 a square meter if they're building any sort of like domestic place. How big's an average? Like, how big's a small flat? I guess would be like I don't know, like 50 square meters. I've seen that. Hold on. Average size of small flat UK. 46 square meters. So let's say it's 50 meters, yeah. So 1250 times 50, 62,000. So you could build two homes, you could build two flats for the amount of money that was spent on this charity or whatever. And over time, obviously, if you're doing that for every person every 5 years, you're gonna in 10 years' time, you're gonna have built a lot of flats that you know, sort of things, help things out. The tangent I was going to go on is I'm just preparing to do a video about learned helplessness. So we talk about it very briefly on the training day me and Shannon do. So it's kind of based on this experiment where there's like they basically put a dog in a cage. If you're an animal lover, by the way, this is probably not a good story for you, but they put this is like 1967 as well, so it's definitely unethical. But they put a dog in a cage. The floor is electrified. There's a little dividing halfway line, effectively, or like a little like low fence. It's like 6 inches high or something. They stick a dog in there and they basically sound an alarm and then they shock the dog through the floor. And the dog obviously goes crazy because it's in pain, but it very quickly realizes that if it jumps over the little fence, it'll be safe. And so, kind of, yeah, that's that they do it a few times. Dog's fine. They then strap the dog. They strap a different set of dogs, a new set of dogs to the floor. So dogs that haven't learned how to kind of avoid the harm do the same experiments. They sound the alarm, shock the dog to the floor. It's strapped to the floor, can't move. Do it a few times. They then take the straps off the dog and continue doing the experiment. And basically, dogs weren't able, almost all dogs weren't able to learn just to jump over the fence themselves. There's all sorts of interesting kind of things that came out of that experiment. So, for example, they tried to kind of like teach the dogs how to avoid it. So they kind of coax it with treats and calling it, didn't work. They found the only thing that actually worked was to physically drag the dog across the barrier. And most dogs just kind of like completely started off limp. They kind of give them dead weight. Some dogs even resisted it, but after between 25 and 200 times on the group, they eventually taught the dogs how to avoid the harm themselves. And then they seemed fine after that. So it's kind of like they seem to be cured. The guy who did it, Martin Seligman, actually has done a lot of useful stuff in psychology because he then asked the question, okay, why are some extends to humans, and there were some experiments done on humans that didn't involve electricity, but why are some humans susceptible to learned helplessness? And the answer is it's not like genetic or like kind of morals. It's if you raise a person, if you raise a kid, if you raise or treat an adult, it basically if you dish out punishment arbitrarily, so there's no connection between the punishment and what you did, then the person learns, well, it doesn't matter what I do because I'm going to get electric shock or whatever. And humans can absolutely be sort of trained out of it as well. But Shannon, this is something you said to me a while back. You kind of said, well, this kind of describes the mentality of charity workers and housing officers. They kind of have this learned helplessness, but they do have a difficult job in the sense that the actual frontline workers are fairly badly paid. There's a lot of stress a lot of the time, but they kind of get into this situation where they have this learned helplessness. I would speculate that's what it is, where they don't think they can do anything about it. So if you speak to most people who work in a sector, they're kind of like, yeah, things are ineffective, things are shit, but they don't think they can do anything about it. So as I say, I'm just kind of like I'm playing around with that, how to kind of explain that in a video, because I think actually it's real kind of positive, constructive message at the end of it. So
Uh, I agree. I think so. Interesting. I was talking about it today, actually, learned helplessness. But again, with a slightly different lens of often we talk about it in regards to like childhood trauma. So like when a child can't escape that trauma and whatever abuse potentially, then they grow up to be an adult and whatnot. But I was talking about today is in like I think the local authority systems and the homelessness sector creates that learned helplessness within people as well. And I don't think it's unusual to say that it does create that in adults because I think like when you look at like things like verification process or again gatekeeping, like when you first approach the council or sanctions with benefits, like how have we not made the link between sanctioning people on benefits and this learned helplessness? Like then they don't ask for help when they get into arrears because they're so terrified that if they're honest about their own financial situation that they're going to get more sanctioned. And I think obviously like with the current consultation around benefits up in arms and stuff, it'd be really interesting to come from it, like to look at it with that perspective. Um, and again, I think it does, like you say, it gives power back perhaps to the systems a little bit in terms of like you guys can actually do something about this. But I think yeah, obviously, I think you're right because I said it to you a while back, but
yeah,
about like the workers also having that learned helplessness. And I guess that's why I like the stuff we do in Bedford around like housing committee questions and FOIs and stuff because it kind of feels like, and I know one of our council workers has sort of said, she has to remind herself that we're her critical friend. But like in my head, we're kind of there to lift them over the barrier. Do you know what I mean? Like, and that sounds patronizing potentially, but it's no more patronizing to how the system treats the homeless. Um, yeah, I've rambled there. Sorry.
no, no, I think you're right on two counts. I think on both counts, I think you're right to say that because if you think about it, someone could write a really good homes application, as in they include all the right details. It's basically absolutely spot on, and yet it doesn't kind of matter because if the housing officer, doesn't feel like given a positive decision, then that's what's going to happen that day. So I think as a sector, I mean, there will be other ways as well that the sector itself generates learned helplessness. But then again, yeah, I think that's the kind of for me the part of the constructive thing of this is like, yeah. So in the experiment, they had to kind of basically be unpleasant to the dog. They had to kind of like physically drag it. I don't think they actually kicked any dogs, but they did kind of talk about it as like a bit of a kick up the arse sort of thing. But again, that's sort of I wonder if there's like a lot of truth in that, in the sense that actually the way to deal with the sector and to deal with learned helplessness in the professionals is to literally just kind of be brutal with them, not like rude, but kind of just really kind of upfront about their failures. And I wonder if that I think you're right. I think that's actually part of the solution to homelessness is to kind of basically shock the council officers and shock the homeless professionals into thinking differently. I mean, go back to that book about learned helplessness. Sorry, about Friends and Purpose, Math Potts book. I heard Math Potts speaking about 2009, 2010, and he was absolutely instrumental in me just kind of not being just kind of a career sort of charity worker, because he basically just very kind of politely, very nicely exposed the kind of the addiction to kind of chaos and kind of like that the workers have. Workers just love drama, they love kind of incidents, they kind of, certainly we did that night show. We loved, we loved kind of, we didn't say we loved it, but we loved the kind of drama of that role. And he was just very calmly and very politely just completely dismantled that. And as I say, changed the course of my work. But yeah, that for me, I mean, that was kind of that jolt of like just being confronted by the truth of what I was doing, and that was enough for me to kind of to think about it and basically do something else.
There's research recently that's come out, and it would be really helpful if I could remember where I read that research or sort of more specific details than I'm gonna give tonight, so apologies, guys. But there was research basically explaining how, do you know we call them like warrior mums? Or like, and often it's mums of like special educational needs children or
Clustered
children with,
Injustice, you're getting it from is Luke Clements.
yeah, but no, so there was research around how that cohort, and you can apply it to other cohorts, and I think this is like linked into what you're talking about sort of enjoying that fight, is like that argumentative and like wanting not because the people don't want to fight, like it shakes them up, it gives them panic attacks, it like keeps them up at night, but it's addictive. The same chemicals it releases in your brains, research has shown that it becomes addictive. Like it, you need that fight. So then when someone is having, say then they're in their own accommodation, it's safe, it's suitable, everything else, but one small thing and it's like, rah, I'm ready to go again. It's because they've gotten so used to the fight, and you sort of, again, you don't thrive off of it because it's stressful, but you kind of go, this is what I'm used to. Like, you do enjoy that element. And I think, particularly with clients, that's a very uncomfortable reality. Um, but it can explain a lot of like behaviors you might see in people when you think they're finally settled and then they're looking for a fight or whatever, whatever. And I think, but like you were saying, sort of working at the night shelter or whatever, you can see it there as well. Like both sides become addicted to this sort of battle, and power and everything else then plays into it as well.
So there's again, I'm just sort of playing around with things I've been thinking about. So there's a philosopher called Karl Popper who wrote a really good book called Open Society and Its Enemies. I mean, it's probably as about well regarded as a 20th century philosopher is. And so his whole point, it was written in the Second World War. I think he was German, but he wrote it in New Zealand or something. Anyway, but he wasn't, he was, I mean, by then the kind of Nazis were on the retreat, and he was talking about the threat of communism. And he basically said the threat of communism, the kind of communism has like, good ideas in terms of we want equality, we want people to kind of not, to kind of not go without and stuff. But he said the reason that communism is so dangerous is because they'll sacrifice the interests of the individual for the greater good. And for me, like that night shelter environment, effectively, you're trying to manage an environment which is just deeply unpleasant, inhumane, and you're kind of having to make decisions where, for the greater good, for the good of the house or whatever, for the good of the building, you're having to like evict people, sometimes very unfairly. And that for me, any environment where you have to do that. I mean, I would say in that if you're given that environment, that's you don't really have a choice with that, and that's the reason why we shouldn't have those environments at all. We should not have sweeps. We should not have night shelters at all, because there is no way of managing those situations where you've got lots of different people angry about the state of the place, if nothing else, and you're having to kind of like, yeah, kind of, as I say, like evict people, bar people for silly, effectively small, trivial things. You're kind of having to squash the individual needs of the people, because you need to kind of maintain the safety of the whole environment. And that's, I think, any institution that is going to kind of fall into that trap. And is again another reason why I dislike supported accommodation so much, because no matter how nice it is, it still has the kind of that need to manage the behavior of people living there, and kind of staff think that's their job to do that. They have a right to do that when really don't. So I think for me, it has an also kind of relevance to homelessness law itself, because again, in the UK we have rights that come through the law, And any housing officer says, oh, we haven't got enough stock, or we can't, anyone who kind of like squashes the individual rights of a person in front of them for some greater good, saving resources or something somewhere else. That for me is like that's why we should not tolerate it. That's one of the big reasons why we shouldn't tolerate it. So I'm not sure we're going to do a video about that at some point, but that's something I've been thinking about recently, just how institutional settings just can't they can't protect and they can't help people thrive. They're just by their very nature, they're just not able to do that. So sure, lots of support accommodation CEOs will be up in arms when we saying that, but they're probably not watching this, so it's probably all right.
I think it's a weird setup where it's just gonna be messy. How do I word? Like supported accommodation, a lot of workers within supported accommodation, they can't see their clients as whole beings or as equals, or even potentially as people who are like more qualified or, whatever above them. And that's a really weird dynamic because I think if a lot of supported accommodation workers were to be like, oh no, this is the person who can do this, can do that, can do that, it kind of makes their job obsolete. Or I don't think it makes their job obsolete. I don't think that's the issue. I think it messes with their own head. And then they can't deal with the fact that, and it's not a question of like, oh, this could happen to me because it's happened to someone similar to me. I don't think it's that. I think it's something around like, I'm not sure, I haven't worked it out, but I think it does something to the brain where they can't picture themselves in a caring position for their equal. And I think, again, like linking in something slightly different, but when you look at like older generations who, like, so my grandparents, for example, happy to say this, but my granddad's got Alzheimer's dementia. That relationship between my nan and granddad has completely changed because at one point they were equals, and now my nan's taking that caring role. And you see it all the time in this situation where that balance is so, so difficult, and the person caring goes through real mental turmoil because the dynamics have changed. And I think if the supported housing workers were to accept that that dynamic is similar, is this making sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I've got some follow-on thoughts to say about it. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, I think the whole. I mean, in fact, I'll say something when you kind of made your point. It's making sense. Yeah, it is.
But I think this is my point. Like, I think the workers, if they were to recognize the sort of whole person, the holistic person, and the fact that, they're not as unworthy as perhaps their their profession tells them they are, it would do something to their own position in society, and it would also deal with their own like that balance of, well, I'm in a caring profession. How am I supposed to care for someone who is my equal? And so I think that becomes like the them and us. And then there's a whole other rant and conversation about actually we should just accept that there's a them and us potentially and all of that sort of stuff. But yeah, I'll stop there.
No, it's cool. I think, yeah, I mean, based on that, and I guess I'm interested to see if anyone's got any kind of thoughts about this because I don't know what the answer is. Hey, you what, Cheeseface? And you what, Tiff? Sorry, guys, so I'm not keeping a full eye on the chat here, but so the whole kind of language. So okay, right, I'm going to say some other stuff which I find interesting. Is that there's a TED talk from a lady who I can't even remember their name because it's an unusual name. Basically, she's talking about how language shapes how you think, and so she's kind of quoting that in Spanish and German, the German word for bridge is feminine, and the Spanish word for bridge is masculine. You ask a bunch of Germans and some Spaniards describe a bridge, the Germans will kind of give words like, oh, it's really elegant, it's really beautiful, like kind of feminine type words. And the Spaniards will be like, yeah, it's really kind of, really strong and really robust. They'll give kind of masculine words. She then talks about this tribe of Aboriginals in Australia who don't have a word for left and right. They just use northeast. They were like, mate, there's a snake at your northeast foot. And their whole brain is really, really good at like, so that they could, they would know exactly what we meant because they're constantly orientated. So we introduce words like support needs, and you have like a tick list, drug and alcohol issues, mental health issues, whatever. That completely is like a mental straitjacket for basically for us understanding that actually, yeah, lots of people do have these kind of issues on paper, but for me, there's absolutely no correlation between people who might be, they might tick a number of those boxes and how well they'll maintain accommodation. One of the reasons why I kind of believe what I believe about homelessness so much is that I've seen people who are supposed to be unhousable again and again, just maintaining their own accommodation fine. And yes, they tick every box pretty much on that list. Literally every box, even like arson, kind of like literally every box. And the homeless sector has not found a way to understand why that is. So they'll kind of treat everyone according to what their support needs are on paper, rather than actually what their strengths are. As you were saying earlier, just kind of we just don't have the homeless sector, the support accommodation sector does not have language to enable them to think that, let alone assess things properly, whatever. I've said this to someone at Bedford Borough Council recently, and I think it was just went over the head, to be honest. But yeah, yeah. Um, as I say, I'm interested to see stop hiring parking attendants. Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a whole another conversation about kind of the caliber of people going into it and why they go into it. Yeah. Um, and the kind of like that, certainly that the power you do have as a homeless professional, yeah, certainly does go. I mean, did it go to my head when I worked at the night shelter? Probably, yeah. Probably there were certainly people who I barred when if I looked at it, I'd just be embarrassed what the reason for the barring. Yeah, they broke the rules, but it was stupid rules, and I should. I think back actually, I kind of like just regret a lot of it because some of the guys working with me were like people who'd been homeless before, and they were right about it. They were kind of like saying no, we can't be barring people for that sort of stuff. But as an organisation and an institution, like we just ignored them really and kind of said, oh, we need to follow the rules. So yeah, I don't know. I really think the homeless sector needs to figure out a way of like it always says it does. It always says it's trauma informed. It always says it's strength based, but it's not. It's not in the slightest. How do you assess someone's ability to maintain their own accommodation? Most people can maintain their own accommodation, even if they've got, I mean, when I went to the drug and alcohol service, there was like about 900 opiate users in Bedford Borough who were in treatment, and that's probably like a third of the kind of the actual number of people using opiates. Almost all of them were housed. And yet, when you talk to a homeless worker about heroin, they're like, "Oh, that's the worst one. That's the one which is like there's no coming back from." And yet, loads of people, even kind of using heroin problematically, are able to maintain their accommodation fine, absolutely fine. Um, and the homeless sector, that's like they just can't they can't compute that. That's not doesn't work for them.
But I guess this is then like, well, what actually is the role of the homelessness sector within homelessness or housing law, right? Because actually, if you did, quote the LGO Brentwood report, accommodate first, investigate later, that's when you would find out that most people would be fine as long as the house is safe and suitable. Then they can manage their own place. And like, all right, some places, like some people might need help with setting up utilities or whatever, and that's where your CAB comes in. That's where a service might come in. And again, arguably that should be the local authority because that's under prevention. In my mind, that's under prevention of homelessness. It's helping someone set those things up. Um, and so I think it's weird because in one sense we're asking the homelessness sector, what's your role with this? But arguably you shouldn't have a role in this. Like if the law and stuff was followed, we're then talking about a very, very small percentage of people who might not be eligible, might genuinely be intentionally homeless, and sort of that's where the homelessness sector should fit in my mind. It shouldn't fit in on the other stuff. Like it's a weird, but that whole like cost sunk fallacy, they're just
Yeah.
not gonna. It's not like tomorrow night, the homelessness sector was going to shut down, is it? Because they pump too much money into it to admit that that is the case.
I mean, I try not to be too cynical, but there's too many chief execs and too many staff effectively who are, yeah, yeah, fully invested in it. That's their careers. I often hear CEOs, well, not often, but I hear CEOs kind of talking about, oh, we're going to end homelessness and we've got an exit strategy for your career. And they're like, well, what is that exit strategy? Because you're rubbish at everything, basically. What's your job going to be when you're not getting 70, 80K for running a homeless service? I'm not sure what skills you've actually got, but they kind of absolutely, yeah. I mean, I just think that it's kind of completely wrapped up in it. I think it's question for us is like, given it's a bit like so in Bedford, I've been reflecting on the increase in TA of single people. So the actual figures now is like 6,500%. It's like there's nearly 700 people in TA, single people in TA, and that is a large part because of what we did at Just Us, which is a good thing in itself. But what I did not anticipate doing that is that the homeless sector, the charity sector, the hostel sector basically then had all these voids because people are no longer using their service because they're now in TA. So they didn't shut down. They just basically took people in from further and further afield. And so there's this kind of like, again, like when you try and fix a problem, there's a danger that you kind of, you create another problem because what Bedford's now got is all these people in TA who should be in TA. You've got more people, hundreds of people in supported accommodation now who should be in supported accommodation in central beds or whatever, who are going to end up in Bedford Borough Council probably. So yeah, it's just kind of like it's when to solve homelessness, you've got to kind of work out, okay, the support accommodation sector is effectively going to sabotage it because they're invested in it. How do we add that into the things we've got to strategize to fix? It's a bit like if you're going to end homelessness in the UK, you've basically got to damage house prices a lot because what we're talking about here is building more houses. That's going to increase supply. It's going to reduce demand. That's going to bring housing prices down. That isn't just a problem for homeowners, that's a problem for a whole economy because it's large part of it's just based on people getting richer by just owning property. So again, it's kind of like, okay, how do we like strategize for that? I haven't got any answers. I mean, by the way, guys, just for those who joined late, obviously we're just playing around with this kind of format really. This is just things that me and Shannon have been sort of like thinking about because Will was away this week. Last minute he was away, so we just thought we'd have a go at this. So interested to know if people are finding this interesting or not. It was just kind of two people
Just
just
talking to the
yeah,
void.
yeah.
I think
Um,
like the Supported Housing Act potentially could change the cohorts of people going into supported housing, which, and again, obviously, we often talk about supported housing in terms of like just like the homelessness cohort, or people experiencing homelessness. But actually, most like not most supported accommodation, but I think when the government thinks about supported accommodation, it's often like actually more care home sites type of supported accommodation or physical supported accommodation. Um, and so potentially that could change, but it's also interesting, like the benefit side of things of like actually if the supported accommodation isn't meeting their licensing criteria, we're gonna hit you in where it hurts, like financially. And I think that could potentially have some interesting unintended consequences. And obviously, like one of the things I want to try and work out is what those consequences could be. And I think that's where like the system stuff comes into everything of like trying to work out, when you pull this bit of the web, where else it, whatever. I'm only getting into that new, but like it's
yeah,
all very
yeah,
complicated because I'm also like just house people.
yeah.
Um,
No,
but
so sorry, go on. I was going to say, like, because I'm decorating, I did a big job last 2 weeks. I was listening to a lot of podcasts, and I heard one interview between Alex O'Connor, who I like in general. He's cool, and Professor David Nutt, who's like he was like the drug and alcohol czar for the Labour government, and he basically got sacked because he'd say stuff like it's more dangerous to go horse riding than it is to take ecstasy. That's the facts. Forget what you think. But he basically they then gave a series of examples of when they changed legislation to try and. So, for example, they made one of the key components of MDMA, the ecstasy substance, illegal, like a solvent it was dissolved in or something. And so, what dealers did, well, what the manufacturers then did was they used a different solvent, which is actually far more toxic, which that then resulted in a bunch more deaths. And he basically said for every single change in the law around drug and alcohol, or drugs, has basically had an unintended negative effect. And I think yeah, I think it's with the Support Housing Act, as you say, there's a chance it actually has unforeseen consequences. I mean, I think ultimately hostels will just fudge it and basically keep people coming in and staying in the service and keeping the revenue coming in and just kind of lie about it basically. But I think you're right to kind of think, okay, may well be consequences which we're just not anticipating at the moment. So there's just a couple of questions there I'm going to pick up on, guys. So should the council staff's name be online and the job titles and positions they hold? So, I mean, basically they're public officers discharging public functions, so there is a high level of accountability for them. I don't think then they don't publish names. So certainly the way Bedford does it is anyone over a certain seniority will be kind of named in the press. If they say something in a council meeting, they'll be named. But that's kind of like almost like the top dogs in the housing department. Um, so I don't think there needs to be a public register as such. I think it'd be great if there was one, like kind of like a register of housing officers in general. But in terms of what do you do if the staff keep changing? it's a really difficult one to actually deal with because it's not a legal issue in the sense that it's not, they haven't broken a particular law, they're just rubbish. And I would say the only thing I would say is effective is basically involving councillors and MPs. That's what I would do in that situation. And the question of why do they change so frequently? It's because that, as much as I criticise housing officers, there are some really good housing officers out there who I, kind of respect immensely for kind of doing a good job. But the circumstances they're living, I mean, for those good ones, they're basically ignoring what their bosses are telling him to do and just housing people anyway. Very stressful. Like they know their jobs are at risk by doing it, and that's the good ones. The bad ones basically. It's a bit like that learned helplessness thing we were talking about earlier. If you do a good job as a housing officer, and if you do a bad job as a housing officer, nothing changes. Your workload is exactly the same. So tomorrow you're going to be, staying till 7 o'clock again. So and there's no kind of measure of like who actually did a good bit of work. Sometimes it'll be measured in how many people did he get rid of. So that's not good. That's not a good thing. But in terms of housing officers actually doing genuinely good pieces of work, which does happen, but there's no reward for that because no one even knows they're doing it. So their bosses won't know if they've actually just done, a really good, a really correct kind of robust decision about something or a really good bit of preventative work. So there's kind of there's no reward. There's no kind of like connection between how good an officer they are and the rewards they get. And as we probably said elsewhere, it tends to be the arseholes that get promoted. That's the bottom line, is the ones who can kind of prevent that, gatekeep the most, almost the ones who kind of who kind of are seen to be the ones that the council then want. And it stands to reason if you've got some housing officer who's basically reducing the number of people in TA, then yeah, they're going to get respect. Yeah, they're going to get respect from the organisation and promoted. So
And realistically, that's probably where we've had an unintended consequence where we're like, oh, so and so is a really good housing officer, and you try and get them as your client's housing officer, and then actually what you're doing is adding to that good housing officer's workload.
yeah.
I'm surprised the LinkedIn post didn't make it on your screenshots of the day in the life of a housing officer.
Oh yeah. Oh no, we'll save it for another time. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, but that was an interesting read. Yeah, but like I say, another time.
Yeah, I think I mean I've enjoyed this, so I'm up for this again at some point, not every week or whatever, but yeah. Um, cool. Just check there's nothing in the comments. As I say, like for those guys who are asking questions about specific stuff, as in like individual situations, just bring it to the Thursday one. We'll still be here on Thursday as normal. Yeah, just to say as well, like so I know like 3 of the 5 in March or 3 of the 4 in March were on a Wednesday. That's just random stuff that happened. So it is still normally on a Thursday. It's just last week I was at the Dowett Street conference. The week before it was like my boy's birthday, stuff like that. So yeah. And Will is just I think up to his eyeballs at the moment. So he apologizes for kind of not being around as much. So yeah. Um, yeah, cool. I think that's all the kind of non-specific questions that have been asked. So yeah, cheers, guys. As I say, interested to know what you think about this format, how we could improve it, any specific answers you got to the questions we've posed at various points. Um, yeah, see you on Thursday, I guess.